When you really stop and think about the sheer mechanics of it, I mean, the human stomach is just this intensely hostile environment.
No, absolutely.
It's essentially a biological vat of highly corrosive acid,
Right.
right? Like it's constantly churning, completely designed to break down complex organic matter. And yet somehow, under normal conditions, our digestive tract doesn't just digest itself.
Right. It maintains this highly dynamic mucosal lining to protect itself.
Exactly. But when that lining sustains damage, whether that's from, chronic inflammation, intense stress, or just the wear and tear of modern diets, repairing it is an incredibly complex challenge. I mean, it's a highly volatile environment to try and reconstruct tissue in.
It really is. The gastrointestinal tract is constantly under mechanical and chemical stress. And when the rate of damage outpaces the body's natural cellular repair mechanisms, the mucosal barrier degrades.
Which just leads to this whole cascade of issues.
Yeah, localized and systemic problems just spiral from there.
Well, welcome to this deep dive. Today we are taking you into the microscopic environment of your own gut to analyze a very specific, highly discussed synthetic peptide known as BPC-157.
It's a fascinating topic.
It really is. And our mission today is to separate the verified pharmacological data from, the overwhelming internet hype out there. We have pulled together a massive stack of research for this. We're looking at peer-reviewed publications in the World Journal of Gastroenterology, Current Pharmaceutical Design, the MDPI Pharmaceuticals Journal, and decades of preclinical data out of the University of Zagreb.
There is a lot of dense literature here.
So, okay, let's unpack this. Because if you're looking into advanced science-backed methods for maintaining gut health, you've undoubtedly crossed paths with this compound. We're going to give you a clear, structured breakdown of what BPC-157 actually is, how it triggers cellular rebuilding, and the major reality check you need to consider before treating it like a biological maintenance crew.
What's fascinating here is how the preclinical data actually positions BPC-157. Like, the focus isn't just on soothing an irritated gastrointestinal lining or, just masking symptoms.
Right. It goes deeper than that.
Much deeper. The literature highlights its capacity to actively force the regeneration of damaged tissue. I mean, we are looking at a compound that accelerates the physical rebuilding of the mucosal barrier and the underlying vascular network.
But before we map out how it actually executes that rebuilding process, I feel like we need to establish the blueprint of what this compound fundamentally is.
Good idea.
So BPC stands for Body Protection Compound. And BPC-157 is a synthetic peptide consisting of a highly specific sequence of exactly 15 amino acids.
Yeah.
But the origin of that specific sequence is, it's what initially catches your attention.
Yeah, it isn't just some random chemical combination they synthesized in a vacuum.
Right. It is actually derived from natural gastric peptides found right there in human stomach juices. Like, it is a mirrored fragment of the exact proteins our bodies use to naturally protect our digestive lining from our own acid.
Exactly. It is an isolated, highly concentrated sequence of a naturally occurring gastric repair protein. And the scientific foundation for isolating this specific 15 amino acid chain is heavily credited to researchers at the University of Zagreb School of Medicine.
Predrag Sakaric and his team, right?
Yes, specifically Predrag Sakaric. They have spent literally decades producing preclinical research on this exact sequence, mapping out its cytoprotective properties.
Wow.
Yeah, their work basically demonstrates how isolating this specific peptide chain triggers a profound healing response. And not just in the gut, but in systemic vascular repair across various animal models.
Okay, but let me push back on that for a second. If this is derived from something our bodies already make naturally, why do we need a synthetic 15 amino acid version? I mean, can't our stomachs just do the job themselves?
Well, under ideal circumstances, yes. The native peptides are constantly working to maintain homeostasis in the gut. But when you introduce chronic inflammation or, a severe ulcer or heavy toxicity, the localized cellular damage simply overwhelms your native repair crew. The tissue is degrading way faster than the body can secrete the protective proteins needed to mitigate that damage.
So you just fall behind on the repairs.
Exactly. So by introducing BPC-157, you are taking the specific molecular signaling mechanism responsible for initiating tissue repair, and you're just flooding the system with it.
Oh, I see.
It acts as this overwhelming reinforcement. It completely bypasses the body's exhausted production capacity and directly stimulates the repair pathways, but at a much higher concentration.
So it's basically isolating the exact biological signal for rebuild amplifying it, and just dropping it directly into the compromised environment to override the deficit.
That is a great way to put it.
Okay, that makes sense. And knowing it's a concentrated stomach peptide kind of explains why it functions so effectively within the GI tract. But the real question is how it physically executes that rebuild at the cellular level.
Right, the actual mechanics of it.
Yeah. The pharmacological reviews outline 3 primary mechanisms operating simultaneously. Let's look at the first one, which is angiogenesis.
Angiogenesis is arguably the most critical foundation for deep tissue repair. So BPC-157 actively stimulates the formation of new blood vessels within the damaged intestinal tissue.
Because tissue regeneration is, highly metabolically expensive.
Incredibly expensive. It requires a massive, sustained influx of oxygen, nutrients, and immune cells. If a section of your gut is compromised by an ulcer or chronic inflammation, the existing vascular network is usually damaged or just insufficient.
So it's starved of resources.
Exactly. By forcing angiogenesis, BPC-157 establishes a new, robust vascular supply line directly to the injury site. You simply cannot rebuild complex cellular structures without the logistical network to deliver the raw materials.
Supply lines established. Got it. So the second mechanism focuses on modulating the immune response, specifically through anti-inflammatory pathways. The literature says it downregulates specific pro-inflammatory cytokines, most notably tumor necrosis factor alpha, or TNF-alpha, and interleukin-6.
Right. And modulating those specific cytokines is essential because in conditions of chronic gut dysfunction, the immune system is often locked in this destructive feedback loop.
Right, it just keeps attacking itself.
Exactly. TNF-alpha and IL-6 are primary drivers of localized tissue inflammation. When they remain elevated, the immune response ends up causing collateral damage to the very mucosal barrier it's trying to protect in the first place.
Wow.
So by downregulating the expression of these cytokines, BPC-157 halts that destructive loop.
It's essentially cutting the wire to a chaotic immune panic response. I mean, if the immune system is constantly sounding a false alarm and attacking the area, the cellular construction crew can't do its job.
That's a perfect analogy.
So downregulating TNF-alpha and IL-6 is like turning off the blaring fire alarm so the fibroblast construction workers can actually hear themselves think and start rebuilding the house, all while angiogenesis is out there laying down new supply roads.
I really like that analogy. And that leads directly into the third mechanism, direct tissue regeneration, and the mitigation of oxidative stress.
Right, let's talk about the fibroblasts.
So once the vascular supply lines are established and that inflammatory panic is silenced, BPC-157 heavily activates epithelial cells and fibroblasts. And like you said, fibroblasts are your cellular construction workers.
They lay down the actual structure, right?
Yes. They synthesize collagen and the extracellular matrix, which is the literal structural framework of the gut wall. By stimulating their migration and proliferation at the injury site, this peptide accelerates the physical closure of mucosal gaps and ulcers.
And it handles oxidative stress, too.
Concurrently, yes. It reduces oxidative stress by neutralizing free radicals that would otherwise just continue to degrade the newly forming tissue.
The synergy of those 3 mechanisms is honestly what makes this compound so compelling. I mean, you have angiogenesis providing the metabolic resources, the downregulation of TNF-alpha creating this stable, non-hostile environment, and the activated fibroblasts rapidly laying down the new structural matrix.
It is a highly coordinated biological protocol for resilience.
It really is a systemic, multi-layered approach to cellular repair, rather than just, a single pathway intervention.
Exactly.
But, okay, if BPC-157 is successfully ramping up fibroblast production, stabilizing the vascular network, and halting oxidative stress, what does that physical rebuilding actually look like for someone whose gut barrier is already severely compromised?
We have to look at specific pathologies to answer that.
Right. The clinical discussions around this peptide focus heavily on things like leaky gut, IBS, and Crohn's disease. So let's start with leaky gut.
Well, with leaky gut, the core issue is intestinal permeability. The mucosal barrier relies on these things called tight junctions. They're dynamic protein complexes that literally seal the space between epithelial cells.
And when those degrade.
Right. When they degrade due to stress, poor diet, or inflammation, the barrier becomes permeable. It allows endotoxins and undigested macromolecules to just cross right into the bloodstream, which triggers massive systemic inflammation.
And the preclinical data demonstrates that BPC-157 directly targets that permeability. It upregulates the expression of the proteins that form those tight junctions, right alongside that epithelial regeneration we just talked about.
Yes, it physically closes the gaps.
So if it's strengthening the tight junctions in a leaky gut, is it basically acting like physiological caulking for a drafty window?
That is exactly what it's doing. It rapidly seals those intercellular gaps to reestablish barrier integrity and stop the systemic leakage. It restores the selective permeability of the gut.
Okay, so that's leaky gut. But when we shift the focus to irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, the mechanism looks a bit different, doesn't it?
It does. While maintaining barrier integrity is still vital, IBS pathology is heavily tied to disrupted gastrointestinal motility and localized low-grade inflammation.
Motility being the actual muscle contractions of the gut.
Right. And the research indicates BPC-157 exerts a regulatory effect on the smooth muscle of the intestines. It helps coordinate that gut motility, promoting smoother, more rhythmic contractions.
Which is huge, because dysregulated motility is what drives the severe abdominal cramping, the alternating diarrhea, the chronic constipation that people with IBS deal with.
Exactly.
By stabilizing the neurological and muscular coordination of the gut and simultaneously lowering the localized oxidative stress, it seems to just address both the mechanical and inflammatory drivers of IBS at the same time.
It offers a very unique dual-action approach, but I will say the most aggressive application of BPC-157 in the preclinical literature actually involves severe inflammatory bowel diseases like Crohn's and gastric ulcers.
Right, where the damage is much more profound.
Yeah. In these states, the mucosal lining isn't just permeable. It features deep structural lesions and chronic ulcerations. BPC-157 accelerates deep mucosal healing in these exact scenarios.
And the Zygrib research touches on this specifically with NSAIDs, right?
Heavily. They extensively document its ability to protect the gastrointestinal lining from severe damage induced by NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs like ibuprofen.
Because NSAIDs are notorious for wrecking the stomach lining.
They disrupt prostaglandin synthesis, which literally strips away the stomach's protective mucus layer and causes severe ulceration. BPC-157 counteracts that specific chemical damage and forces the closure of the ulcers.
But wait, let me push back again here. We have to clarify the scope of this healing. Are the pharmacological models suggesting that this peptide acts as a permanent cure for autoimmune-driven conditions like Crohn's disease? Or is this functioning more as, highly advanced symptom management and localized repair?
That is a crucial distinction. The literature absolutely does not frame BPC-157 as a permanent cure for autoimmune diseases.
Okay.
Crohn's disease has deep genetic and systemic autoimmune roots that a peptide like this simply does not rewrite. What BPC-157 does is aggressively repair the collateral damage caused by the disease.
It cleans up the mess.
Exactly. It forces mucosal healing, reduces the severity of the inflammatory flare-ups, and physically rebuilds the ulcerated tissue. By strengthening the intestinal lining long-term, it drastically improves the gut's resistance to chronic injury. But it is fundamentally a tool for profound structural recovery and symptom mitigation. It doesn't alter the underlying autoimmune pathology.
Okay, so it is a powerful biological tool to rebuild a foundation that a disease is actively trying to tear down.
Well said.
Which actually leads us to this fascinating logistical debate in the research. If you are dealing with intestinal permeability or severe mucosal damage, how do you actually introduce this 15 amino acid sequence into the body to ensure it successfully reaches that cellular construction zone?
Because the pharmacokinetics of peptide delivery are notoriously tricky.
Super tricky. Delivery is the primary logistical hurdle. The research heavily debates two primary routes for gastrointestinal repair. Oral administration, usually via a liquid suspension or a capsule, and systemic injectable administration via subcutaneous or intramuscular routes.
And they both have very different functional profiles.
Right. Now, on the surface, oral administration seems entirely logical for gut health. It's non-invasive, it acts locally, you ingest it, and the peptide theoretically travels directly through the GI tract, making physical contact with the inflamed tissue, the leaky tight junctions, the ulcers.
In theory, yes.
However, the literature points out a significant limitation. Oral BPC-157 suffers from fluctuating bioavailability because the peptide chain is highly susceptible to degradation by stomach acid and digestive enzymes before it can fully bind to the local receptors.
It gets broken down too fast.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Well,
we established earlier that BPC-157 originates from stomach juices.
right.
So wait a second. Why on earth would stomach acid and digestive enzymes be a threat to destroying the oral supplement before it can work? If it's a biological mirror of the exact protective proteins naturally secreted in the stomach, shouldn't it thrive there?
You are hitting on the fundamental difference between a native biological system and an isolated synthetic compound.
Okay, walk me through that.
When the human stomach naturally secretes its protective native peptides, they are not just released as naked amino acid chains floating freely in the acid.
Right, they aren't just bare.
Exactly. They are bound to larger carrier proteins and secreted directly within a highly complex viscous mucosal matrix. That biological matrix acts as structural armor. It shields the peptide from enzymatic degradation while it works locally.
Oh, so the synthetic version is missing the armor.
Exactly. When you synthesize BPC-157 and take it orally, you are dropping an isolated, naked 15 amino acid sequence directly into a vat of proteolytic enzymes that are literally designed to cleave protein bonds. It lacks that natural mucosal armor.
Wow, so even though the sequence itself is native to that environment, its delivery method leaves it completely exposed. I mean, the preclinical data does show that a sufficient concentration of the oral peptide does survive the digestive process to exert significant localized healing, but you are inevitably losing a huge percentage of it to the digestive process itself.
Yes. The local efficacy is definitely proven in the models, but the systemic absorption from oral delivery is very limited. And this is exactly why the injectable route is so heavily utilized in the research for systemic repair.
Because it bypasses the gut entirely.
Right. Subcutaneous or intramuscular injections completely bypass the destructive environment of the gastrointestinal tract. The peptide enters the bloodstream intact, offering near-complete bioavailability, and is distributed systemically.
So it goes everywhere.
Exactly. This route allows it to trigger angiogenesis and upregulate tissue regeneration, not just locally in the gut, but across compromised tissue throughout the entire body.
Okay, so if we use an analogy here, the oral route acts like applying a highly targeted topical cream directly to a rash, applying the repair signal directly to the surface of the intestinal cells, despite some enzymatic losses, whereas the injectable route is like an IV drip, flooding the entire vascular network with the repair blueprint.
That's a great way to visualize it.
And the timeline for these effects, according to the pharmacological data, ranges from a few days for acute mucosal irritation to several weeks for deep structural healing, right? Heavily dependent on the delivery method and the severity of the damage.
Absolutely. The pharmacokinetics support both methods, but the systemic absorption of the injectable route undeniably provides a more aggressive, comprehensive biological response.
Okay, so we have spent a significant amount of time breaking down the verified cellular mechanics, the robust angiogenesis, the silencing of TNF-alpha, the rapid closure of leaky tight junctions. Structurally, BPC-157 represents a massive leap forward in peptide therapy.
It really does.
But to be genuinely well-informed on this topic, we have to transition into the reality check. We have to contextualize the data we've been analyzing.
We do, because the critical asterisk attached to all of this literature is the experimental status of the compound.
The elephant in the room.
A massive elephant. The overwhelming majority of the data, including the extensive decades of research out of Zagreb, the mapped pathways of angiogenesis, the documented mucosal healing, all of it is entirely derived from preclinical animal models.
Right. We are looking at in vivo studies on rodents and isolated in vitro cellular assays.
Exactly.
High-quality, double-blind, placebo-controlled human clinical trials are virtually non-existent in the published literature. And because of that absence of human data, BPC-157 is not approved by major regulatory agencies like the FDA or the EMA for human medical use.
It is strictly classified as an investigational compound.
Which basically means anyone accessing it outside of a clinical setting is navigating a completely unregulated gray market landscape.
This raises an important question, though. The translation from animal models to human biology is the ultimate hurdle in pharmacology. You simply cannot definitively state that the exact metabolic pathways or receptor affinities and immunological responses observed in a rodent's gastrointestinal tract will translate perfectly on a 1-to-1 ratio to a human patient.
Even though a lot of those pathways are similar.
Right. While mammalian healing pathways, like the role of fibroblasts and the function of VEGF in angiogenesis, are highly conserved across species, the variables introduced by human biology are just immense.
So what does this all mean for the listener? I mean, does the profound efficacy seen in the Zagreb studies give us genuine reason for human optimism? Or are we just looking at a compound that is incredibly efficient at creating the world's healthiest lab rats?
Well, the optimism within the pharmacological community is genuine and it is warranted. The specific mechanisms BPC-157 targets are universal to human tissue repair.
Okay, that's encouraging.
But that optimism is currently heavily throttled by the lack of human safety data. Without large-scale clinical trials, we lack established pharmacological dosing protocols, and more critically, we do not fully grasp the potential long-term systemic risks.
Right. I mean, the literature outlines the immediate documented side effects. For oral administration, despite being used to treat GI distress, it can paradoxically cause localized digestive issues in some people, like mild nausea, bloating, transient cramping.
And for injections, you have the standard risks.
Yeah, injection site reactions, localized redness, swelling.
Huh?
But the more pressing concerns are the theoretical systemic effects that haven't been rigorously tested in humans over long durations, right?
Exactly. Think about it. When you introduce a synthetic peptide that powerfully stimulates angiogenesis and cellular proliferation, you are manipulating fundamental growth pathways.
You're forcing the body to build.
Right. Chronic, unmonitored upregulation of new blood vessel formation carries theoretical risks, particularly regarding hormone regulation, systemic growth factors, and how it might interact with undiagnosed cellular abnormalities. We simply do not have the longitudinal human data to rule out long-term consequences on other organ systems.
And when you factor in the unregulated nature of the compound, the variables just multiply exponentially. The literature emphasizes that individual responses to BPC-157 will fluctuate wildly based on a person's unique gut microbiota, concurrent meds, baseline metabolic health.
Not to mention the sourcing issues.
Oh yeah. Sourcing an investigational peptide without regulatory oversight means you are entirely dependent on the purity protocols of third-party synthesizers. The structural integrity of that 15 amino acid chain or the presence of heavy metals or contaminants, those are massive unknown variables for the end user.
It is a profound pharmacological frontier. The cellular mechanisms are undeniable in preclinical settings, yes, but human application currently requires navigating extreme biochemical variables without the safety net of clinical oversight.
Wow. We've covered a massive amount of ground dissecting this microscopic repair protocol today.
We really have, just to synthesize the data we've analyzed. BPC-157 is a highly specific 15 amino acid peptide derived from the native protective proteins of gastric juice. Preclinical models demonstrate it forces rapid tissue regeneration by upregulating localized angiogenesis, downregulating destructive inflammatory cytokines like TNF-alpha, and stimulating the proliferation of fibroblasts.
Right.
It offers profound potential for sealing the intercellular gaps of a leaky gut, coordinating motility in IDS, and executing deep mucosal repair for severe conditions like Crohn's disease and NSAI-induced ulcers. However, its translation to human medicine remains heavily constrained by a lack of clinical trials, making its current systemic use highly investigational and heavily reliant on individual risk assessment.
For you listening, navigating the complexities of chronic digestive disorders is just an incredibly exhausting process. I mean, the chronic pain, the systemic inflammation, the trial and error of symptom management, it takes a massive toll. And trying to filter through the noise of unregulated health trends online only adds to that fatigue.
Overwhelming.
But understanding the actual biological frontier, comprehending the cellular mechanics of how peptides interact with tight junctions and vascular networks, that strips away the hype. It equips you with a structural understanding of your own biology, making you a vastly more precise, informed advocate for your health when you do consult with medical professionals.
Yeah.
You aren't just reacting to symptoms anymore. You understand the foundational blueprint of how the body tends to rebuild itself.
Absolutely. And to leave you with a final thought to analyze, building on the origin of this sequence.
Yeah.
If researchers can isolate one specific 15 amino acid fragment from the highly corrosive environment of stomach acid, a localized fragment that possesses the biological authority to trigger systemic angiogenesis and rewrite localized immune responses, what other hyperspecific biological repair codes are currently operating undetected within the human body?
Wow.
Right. What other microscopic regenerative sequences are actively functioning in our daily biological secretions, just waiting to be isolated and deployed by the next evolution of medicine?
It's the ultimate biological construction zone, still operating just beyond our full understanding. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, and we will catch you next time.